Chief Anya Blackstone, a well-regarded police chief, faced racial profiling and assault by a veteran officer while visiting her old hometown. Unaware of her high-ranking position, the officer hit her, only to be stunned when she revealed her authority. But before we dive into the details of this event, don't forget to subscribe. In the heart of a small southern town, Chief Anya Blackstone had come back to her hometown after years of serving as the police chief in a big city. She wasn't just any cop. She was known for her integrity, bravery, and unwavering commitment to justice, which earned her respect from her peers and beyond. However, in her hometown, where old prejudices still lingered, her return stirred mixed reactions. Dressed casually and enjoying a rare day off, Anya strolled down Main Street, reflecting on how little had changed. The faces were new, but the same tense atmosphere of distrust was still present. She knew people were watching her, judging her, but she walked confidently, as always, with quiet strength. Suddenly, the screeching sound of tires interrupted her thoughts. A police cruiser, with its lights flashing, pulled up beside her. Two officers stepped out. One was young and seemed nervous, likely a rookie, while the other, an older man with a hardened face, showed no sign of sympathy. His hand rested on his baton as he marched toward Anya. "Hey you, what are you doing around here?" the older officer barked, his tone filled with authority but also something more sinister. Anya furrowed her brow and responded calmly, "Just walking." "Is there a problem?" The officer narrowed his eyes. "You don't belong here. Show me some ID." Anya kept her composure, reached for her wallet, and was about to hand it over when the officer snatched it from her. He flipped through it roughly, and his expression darkened with disgust. Without warning, he tossed her wallet to the ground. "Don't you dare disrespect me, girl," he snarled, venom in every word. Anya, still composed, bent down to pick up her wallet. "I'm not disrespecting anyone," she replied, "but you better watch how you speak too." Before she could finish, the officer struck her across the face, knocking her backward. The rookie froze, wide-eyed and unsure of what to do, as the older officer loomed over Anya. She steadied herself, pain flickering across her face. "Who do you think you are, walking around like you own the place?" he sneered. Anya slowly rose to her feet, wiping a small drop of blood from her lip. Her gaze locked onto his, steady and fearless. She reached into her jacket, pulled out her badge, and held it up for him to see. "I'm Chief Anya Blackstone, and I'll be taking your badge for this." The officer's face turned pale as he absorbed her words. The rookie stepped back, his hand trembling on his radio. A small crowd had gathered, and gasps rippled through the onlookers. "She's the chief," someone whispered. Anya stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. "You're going to regret that punch." The officer's mouth opened, but no words came out. He glanced around, desperate for someone to back him up, but the crowd remained silent, their expressions blank with shock. His hand twitched toward his baton, but the weight of the situation froze him in place. Panic started to creep in as the realization hit him. He had just assaulted a high-ranking officer, someone with far more power and influence than he could have imagined. The rookie stood still, his radio in hand but too stunned to call for backup. His wide-eyed stare darted between Anya and his partner, unsure of what to do next. "Chief," he stammered, finally breaking the heavy silence. Anya turned her gaze toward him, softening slightly. "You might want to start thinking about your next move, officer," she said, her tone sharp but calm. "Because your partner here has crossed a line he can't step back from." The rookie fumbled for words, opening and closing his mouth, unable to form a sentence. He glanced at the veteran officer, who had taken a few steps back, his face turning an alarming shade of red. The crowd had grown larger now, made up of locals and passers-by who had caught wind of the altercation. Phones were out, cameras recording every moment. The older officer, trying to shake off his initial shock, puffed out his chest and tried to regain control of the situation. "I don't care if you're the chief or the president," he sneered, though his voice wavered just enough to betray his fear. "You looked suspicious, so I acted within my rights," the officer began to explain. But Anya cut him off, her tone sharp and unwavering. "Suspicious?" Because I'm a black woman walking down the street? That's the excuse you're going with. The officer hesitated, glancing nervously at the crowd that had gathered. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the onlookers, and the officer's false bravado started to crumble, his face paling even more. Anya didn't give him a chance to respond. I've been doing this job for a long time, she continued, stepping forward with deliberate, steady movements. Long enough to know when someone's letting their badge turn them into something they're not supposed to be. You think you can hide behind that uniform, but trust me, that badge doesn't give you the right to act like a thug. Her words hit him hard, making him shift uncomfortably. His eyes darted to the crowd, his confidence now evaporating. He opened his mouth to say something, but no words came. All he could feel was the weight of his authority slipping away in front of everyone. Just then, another squad car pulled up, driven by a younger officer. He stepped out cautiously, his eyes scanning the scene, unsure of what he had just walked into. He looked at the rookie, then at the older officer, and finally at Anya. "What's going on here?" he asked, sensing the tension in the air. Before the veteran officer could speak, Anya turned toward the new arrival, holding up her badge with calm authority. "Chief Blackstone, I was just assaulted by this officer," she said, pointing at the man who now seemed to shrink under the weight of the moment. "You'll want to call your captain. Immediately." The young officer blinked in surprise, quickly assessing the situation. His eyes widened as he realized who she was. Without hesitation, he reached for his radio and started making the call. The veteran officer, now visibly sweating, tried to speak again, but his words came out in a confused jumble. "This is a misunderstanding," he stammered. I thought she was." "You thought wrong," Anya interrupted, her voice firm, carrying the full weight of her authority. "What you did today wasn't just a mistake. It was personal, and now you're going to face the consequences." The crowd continued to grow, their whispers turning into murmurs of disapproval. The veteran officer stood frozen, staring at Anya like a man who knew his fate was sealed. Meanwhile, the rookie, still pale, finally found his voice. I didn't know," he mumbled, avoiding eye contact with everyone. Anya's gaze softened slightly as she turned toward the rookie. "You still have a choice," she said, her tone firm but offering a hint of understanding. "Decide what kind of officer you want to be. One who stands by and lets this happen? Or one who steps up when it's time to do what's right?" The young officer swallowed hard, visibly shaken by the weight of the situation. His radio crackled as the captain's voice came through, instructing all units to stand down until he arrived. The silence that followed was thick with tension, as everyone waited. They all knew this moment wasn't just about a punch or a badge. It was about something much deeper, something that had been simmering beneath the surface for too long. And now there was no turning back. As the crowd whispered in growing discontent, the captain's car finally arrived. People stepped aside, parting like a sea as Captain Rodriguez, a seasoned, no-nonsense leader, got out of the car. His expression was unreadable as he approached, but the lines on his face showed the weariness of a man who had handled too many situations like this. Rodriguez walked straight toward Anya, scanning the faces of his officers, and then the crowd. He locked eyes first with a veteran officer, who was now visibly shaking, and then with the rookie, who stared at the ground, avoiding his gaze. Finally, he turned to Anya. "Chief Blackstone," he said, nodding slightly out of respect. "I was told there was an incident. Can you tell me exactly what happened here?" Anya met his gaze, her voice steady but laced with the authority she carried. "Captain, I was walking through town when your officer," she gestured toward the veteran cop, "stopped me without cause, then assaulted me when I asked him why. And now we're here." Rodriguez's face tightened as her words sank in. He turned slowly toward the veteran officer, a man he had worked with for years. A man who had always pushed boundaries, but never like this. "Is that true, officer?" "Reynolds," the captain called, his voice cold and firm. Reynolds opened his mouth, but nothing came out. His skin had turned pale, and his body trembled as though all the confidence had drained from him. The crowd stood in silence, waiting for an explanation that never came. The rookie, standing a few feet behind, finally broke the silence. I didn't do anything, Captain. But he hit her. I saw it. I didn't know who she was at first. I didn't know what to do. Captain Rodriguez sighed deeply, his lips pressed tightly together. He took a step closer to Officer Reynolds, speaking in a low but clear voice that the crowd could still hear. Do you have anything to say for yourself, Reynolds? Anything at all? Reynolds, swallowing hard, finally managed to stammer out. I thought she was someone else. I didn't mean to. I didn't know she was. You didn't need to know who I was, Anya interrupted sharply, her voice filled with conviction. It shouldn't matter. I could have been anyone, just another citizen, and you would have done the same thing, wouldn't you? That's the problem. Her words hung in the air, heavy and condemning. The crowd, which had been murmuring moments earlier, fell silent, watching the scene unfold like a moment of judgment. Captain Rodriguez, his face etched with disappointment, shook his head slowly. Reynolds, take off your badge, he said quietly but with unmistakable authority. You're done. Reynolds' face flushed red with shame, but he didn't protest. With trembling hands, he unclipped his badge and handed it over, realizing the full weight of what he had done and what he had lost. There was no going back. The captain then turned to the rookie. And you, he said, his tone sharp, consider this a lesson. The next time you see something like this happening, you don't freeze. You act. Understood? The rookie nodded quickly, his face pale. Yes, sir. Captain Rodriguez turned back to Anya, meeting her eyes with a mix of regret and respect. I'm sorry, Chief. This should have never happened, especially not in my department. I'll make sure it's handled properly. Anya gave a firm nod, her eyes still blazing with the weight of what had transpired. Make sure that it is. This isn't just about me. It's about how things need to change, here and everywhere else. People like Reynolds have no business wearing a badge. Rodriguez nodded solemnly, clearly understanding the larger implications of what had taken place. Understood. With the situation under control, Captain Rodriguez turned to the crowd, which was still lingering, waiting for closure. Go home, folks, he called out. There's nothing more to see here. This will be dealt with. Slowly, the crowd began to disperse, though the tension in the air lingered. There was unease, anger, but also a hint of something else, hope. Hope that perhaps, after all the ugliness, something better might come from it. As the streets cleared, Anya stood alone for a moment, watching Reynolds as he walked toward the police cruiser, his head hanging low. His career, his sense of authority, everything he had relied on was gone. Captain Rodriguez approached her one last time. If you need anything from me or the department, let me know. I'll make sure it gets done. I will, Anya replied, her voice still firm, though softened with a nod of respect. She knew Rodriguez was a good officer, a man who tried to do right by his people, even in a flawed system. But the system, she knew, still needed change. As she turned to leave, the weight of the day settled on her. She wasn't just the victim of one man's abuse of power. She was part of something much bigger, a fight for justice and equality. And this, she understood, was only one battle in that ongoing war. But she would never back down. Not now. Not ever. And with that, she walked away, her steps confident and unwavering, ready for whatever came next. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget